Thank you all for joining us. We greatly appreciate your attendance this morning, especially at 8 a.m. after last night's festivities on the last day of the conference, Tuesday. So truly, thank you all for being here. My name is Dr. Edric Dorian. I'm a police psychologist for the Los Angeles Police Department, and it's my distinct honor to be presenting here today with two of the most respected and influential leaders in the LAPD, whom I'll introduce shortly. The focus of this session is almost certain to raise questions, concerns, and even a few eyebrows. But we hope that it'll also help raise the quality of both policing services and community relations that all law enforcement agencies desire and deserve. You don't need me to tell you that these are not easy times for police officers. In the last several years, we've seen an unprecedented amount of controversy, confusion, and division between communities and the police officers who serve and protect them. Community members have pleaded for understanding and consideration, while law enforcement agencies have done the same. At times, powerful lessons have been learned. At other times, divisions have only grown deeper. Where do things go from here? This morning, we don't claim to be the experts who can answer that question, nor do we claim that the considerations presented today will be appropriate or relevant to all agencies. But we do expect that by sharing our experiences, our own journey, and by having open discussions about the needs and challenges facing today's law enforcement agencies, we might help carry the torch of change just a few steps further. I'd like to acknowledge that we've made the challenging decision to include in this presentation video footage of newsworthy events involving officers and departments across the United States. There may be some representatives of those agencies in this room. We include these incidents, including our own agencies, with the respect and consideration that those agencies and involved officers deserve, balanced by the need for us all to speak openly about how such events impact not only the officers involved, their agencies and municipalities, and their local communities, but also about how these incidents impact the broader relationship between law enforcement and the public as a whole. In other words, all of us. In this 24-hour news cycle, social media-driven time that we all live in, the actions, whether real or perceived, of any officer in any agency on any given day can either help us all move one step forward together or one step back. So a bit about the three of us on this panel. So with a police psychologist, SWAT commander, and assistant chief, you kind of have the makings of a three guys walk into a bar joke. But the reality is at the LAPD, we have a close working relationship. Just a side note that the LAPD was the first agency to hire a full-time in-house police psychologist. How long ago? 10, 20, 30, 40? This year's actually our 50th anniversary of our shop of police psychologists. And so we have one of the largest sections of police psychologists probably in the country, if not the world. There's 16 of us that are in-house. And many of you have psychologists that you either consult with or use. I should note that we are not the psychologists that do the pre-employment screenings or fitness for duty evals. We are interventionists providing services to ensure the well-being of officers, and we provide consultation and training, including in operational matters such as SWAT callouts. So as the slide shows, the LAPD SWAT team, the crisis negotiation team, is embedded within that, of course. It's an integrated model that pairs two SWAT operators with specialized training in crisis negotiations with an in-house police psychologist. The two SWAT officers conduct the actual negotiations with support and consultation from the police psychologist on communication skills, mental health and substance abuse considerations, and strategies to motivate change and surrender. The officer in charge of LAPD SWAT is Lieutenant Ruben Lopez, here on the extreme left, who oversees and conducts all SWAT operations, including both the crisis negotiations and tactical elements of every call-out. Lieutenant Lopez will be providing insights on the etiology of SWAT's need for a strategic disengagement policy and reflections on its implementation. Assistant Chief George Villegas, right here to my left, is one of the highest ranking members of the LAPD and oversees our Critical Incident Review Division and chairs the LAPD Use of Force Review Board. He'll be providing the administrative perspective on the development and implementation of a strategic disengagement policy. Please note that none of us are legal experts and that this presentation is not meant to provide legal guidance in any way. Instead, we highlight incidents and relevant case law that have informed our growth and development as an agency. It goes without saying that you should always consult your agency's legal counsel before determining best practices. This is the landscape we expect to cover. You'd be glad to know I won't read it to you. But we'll talk about this de-escalation and strategic disengagement, two concepts that may be familiar to you, but we find are often confused. And now, before proceeding, I'd like to ask, by show of hands, how many folks are familiar with this story from the Boston Globe last year? Show of hands? Okay, see a number of people. So this incident took place in Hingham, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston, when the father of a 26-year-old emotionally distraught man named Austin Reeves repeatedly begged police to scale back their response, which had escalated to include a regional SWAT team. Austin had barricaded himself in his bedroom with a handgun.
Good morning. This is a message from the Hingham Police Department. We remain on scene with the distraught person inside a home on Edgar Walker Control Court. Residents in the Conservatory Park neighborhood are asked to remain indoors or shelter in place. SWAT canine remain here.
If they just listened. I told them if you push him into a corner, he's going to die. Austin was talking about guns. He was upset. He was a little bit agitated. And I said, well, please sit down. And he said he wasn't going to sit down. I don't know what else he said. Then he went upstairs. He was a good boy. This is a kid who's upset about his girlfriend, and he's not really excited about his future. What I wanted to do was, with Austin's mother, go up there and get the gun. He was standing here. This is my son's rooms, and then on the back they banged those down, and needlessly. When the police came here, he was upstairs with the dog, just fine. All right, and I said, so what's the rush here? Where's the imminent threat? Just let him go to sleep with the dog. he'll go to sleep with the dog. You don't have to do that. You don't have to force him out of there. I never wished they would stop me from going to my son's window and yelling, "Come out, Austin, come out."
Hello, this is a message from the Hingham Police Department. The Hingham Police Department would like to thank you for your cooperation this morning and notify you that the incident on Edgar Walker Court has been resolved. Thank you.
Sunday, 7:19 a.m.
So as you might have figured, Austin died of a self-inflicted gunshot on that day. Now, the investigation of that incident remains ongoing, with differing views on the nature and need for the police response that occurred. But what is clear is that the incident has had a significant negative impact on the relationship between the police department and its community, with calls for demilitarization and resignations and more. This incident is just one example of a broadening disconnect in policing today, where what constitutes reasonable action to law enforcement professionals doesn't always match up with what constitutes the right thing to do in the eyes of the community. This broadening disconnect can be summarized by one phrase: so expectations among the community are that police officers will do the right thing for the community, regardless of what constitutes reasonable action. While expectations from the courts are more and more that the police will not provoke worse outcomes than were present before their involvement. This is particularly true in cases that involve persons in crisis, which includes both individuals suffering from mental illnesses and individuals who are situationally distraught. So what do you all think? Would you say law enforcement responses to persons in crisis have been increasing or decreasing over the years? I can't hear you. Exactly, increasing. Which highlights just how important it is for law enforcement to adapt and change to this new reality. A few sample facts. This is adapted from an excellent book called Insane: America's Criminal Treatment of Mental Illness. Imagine this, between 1950 and 2000, 1950 to 2000, right? 50 years, the number of people with serious mental illness living in psychiatric institutions dropped from almost 500,000 people in 1950 to about 50,000 in 2000. Now, do you think the need has also dropped? Not even close, right? But 90% of the beds or facilities that existed in 1950 have disappeared. Today, the country's largest, the United States' largest providers of psychiatric care are not hospitals, but who? Jails. And were the jails built for that purpose? Not even close. So the largest psychiatric institutions in America tend to be the jails in Chicago, New York City, and where I used to work, Twin Towers Correctional Facility in downtown Los Angeles. Across the country, correctional facilities are struggling with the reality that they've become the nation's de facto mental health care providers, although they're not built for that purpose. By some counts, they make up as much as 50% of the jail population. It's estimated that as many as 50% of people with mental illness will be arrested at some point in their life. And it's not just arrests. 25% of the nearly 1,000 fatal police shootings in 2016 and 2017 involved a person with mental illness. So I'll explain this slide, which is a little overwhelming at first. But we have about 1.2 million individuals in the United States living with mental illness, sitting in jails and prisons every year. Often their involvement with the criminal justice system begins with low-level offenses: jaywalking, disorderly conduct, trespassing. So this is from a website called the Sentencing Project. I encourage you to take a look at it. Really great data on there. In 2015, they looked at the number of people incarcerated per 100,000 residents. And I promise this is going to be a very simple explanation. What they did is they ranked every state by the number of people per 100,000 that are in jail. And so you can see the rankings from 1 through 50. And they organized it by access to mental health care in each state relative to the number of adults with mental illness in the criminal justice system. So the takeaway here is the states with less access to mental health care have more mentally ill individuals in their criminal justice system. So if you take a look at the ones colored purple, they have the greatest access to mental health services and therefore the lowest rates of people in their jails and prisons with mental illness. And the states down there that are colored in pink or red, they have the least access to mental health care system, and surprise, surprise, they have the highest rates of individuals with mental illness in their jails. So without a mental health system, where do people end up? In jail. With these changing expectations and these changing realities about law enforcement contacts with people in crisis, we owe it not only to our communities to respond accordingly, but to the men and women in blue who have unwittingly become the first line of contact for most people in crisis and a de facto arm of the American mental health system amid the failures of deinstitutionalization. So what does the community expect? They expect that the police are going to be well-staffed, well-equipped, well-trained to deal with all of these incidents, and will make every effort to save and rescue, to use minimal force, and of course, make efforts to de-escalate. In fact, political and regulatory expectations have shifted as well. You can see here an excerpt from the final report of the President's Task Force, which came out a couple years ago. And notice how it emphasizes trust between agencies and their communities and the importance of it for the integrity of the criminal justice system and the effective delivery of policing services. It's in everyone's best interest. More specifically, if you've read the final report, it has 6 pillars of recommendations and change. Well, pillar number 2 actually emphasizes de-escalation and alternatives to arrest or summons. Pillar number 5, which is training and education, specifically emphasizes the need for police training to also consider tactical retreat skills, which is not a common theme discussed in most agencies. And there's reasons for that, because that's not normally how police work has been done. That's not normally how law enforcement agencies see themselves. So change isn't easy. Let's talk about that for a moment. We all know that making any kind of behavioral change in our lives is challenging, let alone trying to implement change in organizations, let alone in law enforcement organizations. There's a number of reasons why change, and specifically this type of change, which we're going to get more and more detailed about, which is strategic disengagement, is difficult. In psychology, we have a number of concepts we borrow from. One of them is framing. Framing says the way you label a situation impacts the way you approach that situation. And once you've labeled it a certain way, we find it very difficult to change the way we see it. So now you have a man with a gun call. How do we approach that radio call? And what happens when we get there and the circumstances are different? And you have a suicidal subject in his own home with his own registered weapon with no imminent threat to the public. Sometimes we can find it challenging to reframe the situation for what it is and what we have versus what we thought we were going to have. And that can create a momentum that we don't stop. And the other, as you know, is amygdala hijacking or emotional hijacking. As the response occurs or even escalates, we're less likely to be able to think clearly, literally because of changes in how blood flow is metabolized in the brain, our ability to step back and reassess the situation. Then you have the what-if disease, which in psychology sometimes we call fortune telling. We arrive at a call, we arrive on scene, and we have these sometimes erroneous or catastrophic predictions about what might happen if we don't intervene in specific ways. What if this happens? What if that happens? And that, as you know, it never ends. You can build a what if on top of a what if. And that might sometimes drive actions that we later say, maybe that wasn't a good idea. Then you have the myths regarding mental illness and suicide. There are many, many out there. The idea that mentally ill people are dangerous and violent, that the statistics just don't support. I've even had an officer very directly tell me, hey doc, we all know that wherever there is SI, suicidal ideation, we know wherever there's SI, there's HI as well, homicidal ideation. So imagine approaching a situation with a suicidal subject and having this core belief that this is also a homicidal, violent person who's going to want to try to hurt or kill you. That's going to make a big difference in how we approach that situation. Then you have moral value conflicts, and we see this a lot. Excellent intentions, really, really good intentions, truly wanting to help people, sometimes save people from themselves, but may conflict with community and legal expectations. So I teach a course 3 times a year at the LAPD, and it has about 60 to 85 students in it, and the students are police officers that are named defendants in civil liability. That's how much civil liability we deal with. And what we see over and over again when we talk about reactions, officers will say, I did the right thing, and now I'm getting sued for it. A little bit about police personality, police culture. We know that we have action-oriented, problem-solving, sometimes authoritative personality styles that have an aversion to anything that smacks of quitting or giving up or walking away or retreating. I mean, that's just not in our vocabulary, right, in law enforcement. And if we have those kinds of associations to concepts like disengaging from a situation, that's going to make it tough to implement. And then, of course, as you see with the movie poster there, we got the Hollywood dilemma. And as Lieutenant Lopez will attest to, that's exactly what the LAPD SWAT team looks like 24/7. And what that speaks to is community expectations that, it's kind of like the CSI effect, that, oh, okay, the SWAT team is here or the police department's here, they can do all kinds of things, shoot the gun out of his hand and somehow, some way, save the day, get an excellent, clean outcome. And as we all know, it doesn't always work that way. And lastly, and most importantly for our presentation today, is the plethora of legal misconceptions that officers have about what they have to do or what they're supposed to do or what they need to do in situations involving persons in crisis. So to elaborate further about the legal considerations that guide our discussion of strategic disengagement and to share the perspective of how the LAPD SWAT team came to embrace disengagement as a viable option, I'd like to introduce Lieutenant Ruben Lopez, officer in charge of the LAPD SWAT team.
Thanks, Doc. Morning. Thank you all for being here. I know you had I'm told, a heck of a party last night, right? And it's the last day. I'm sure you guys want to get back home. But this is an important topic. It wasn't an easy road. I first started researching this about 3-4 years ago. We had an incident where it was a female. Her husband had passed away. He was a retired sheriff. She was on the sheriff's department, but she was pensioned off due to medical. We found out later it was mental health issues. And she'd called a loved one and said, hey, you know what, I'm having a bad day. It's the anniversary of my husband's death. She'd been drinking, of course. I think I'm going to end it. So that resulted in a welfare check. Third party called. Back then, before we changed it, I looked around. I saw the armored vehicles. I saw all my officers tacked up. And I started scratching my head like, what are we doing here? Why are we here? So that started, we talked her out. She followed up the week later, hey, thanks for not hurting me. And that really stuck with me. And that's one thing we do on the team, is that we debrief some of these individuals, kind of see what was the changing point, what was the turning point that made them come out peacefully. So I started researching this. I'm going to show some videos. I'm not judging tactics, not here to say how LAPD would do it. These are just some examples out there of what we're talking about and why it is important. But the fundamental question is what do you have? Some of the misconceptions, suicidal people are dangerous, and they are. We've had some incidents. I'll talk about Santa Barbara where a student killed some fellow students. However, the statistics don't bear it out. And I'm not saying to jeopardize officer safety whatsoever. It is a call for service, but truly, is it a police matter or is it a social service matter? I'm here to say it's a social service matter, but because the system is broken, like the doctor said, we get the call and we have to pick up the pieces. But it's very important to realize that being mentally ill, refusing to take medication, or even being suicidal in California is not a criminal act. When I first introduced this, and I still get the resistance, the first instinct is, like the doctor said, we're problem solvers. You know, we don't disengage. The president's report said tactical retreat. Try that sound to your troops, right? That'll go over like a lead balloon. So it's how you word it. But when you start educating your officers, I guarantee you the light bulb will come on, like, yeah, what are we doing here? Especially when the individual is telling you, hey, leave me alone. If you come in, we're going to shoot it out. So they're telling you, they're predicting the behavior. But because we don't want to back down, we already brought all our armor, our equipment. Yeah, we're not going to back down. We're now resort to how we deal with suspects. LA is not immune from our own bad press. So this is an incident where the wife called the police. Mr. Martinez was depressed because he was paralyzed, couldn't work, couldn't provide for his family. In 2015, he stabbed himself while in a wheelchair. The wife called 911. Police responded. Officer responded quickly, ran inside, and lo and behold, Mr. Martinez was able to stand up. He stood up while holding a knife. 4 rounds later, he's dead. So the family sued. And in my research, what I found is the majority of these calls where the lawsuits are initiated are by the very people who initiated the 911 call in the first place. So our administrative review is very thorough, very comprehensive, and they faulted the officers for responding without less than lethal, knowing that they had a suicidal male call. They didn't have a beanbag, didn't have a taser. Despite knowing the type of call, within minutes and 4 shots later, Mr. Martinez was dead. A lot of bad press. This was in the press for a while. The Times, which is very pro-police, ran it for a while. I actually know one of the officers. I worked Hollenbeck, which is our east side of our station, and after the administrative findings faulted the officer for not having less lethal, I was talking to him because he's very angry, he's very upset, and that's the fallout of these types of incidents when your officer's getting in not only the bad press, but the personal. I know I didn't come on the job to kill someone who's having a bad day, okay? And most of officers, they're good heart, they want to do the right thing, but well-intended consequences end tragically. And I was talking to him, and he's like, yeah, you know, the department, I got, well, I won't use the language because we're being filmed here, but I was wronged, you know, I was trying to do the right thing. And I says, well, did you know the type of call? He goes, yeah. But I go, but, okay, does this make sense? You killed someone from trying to prevent them from killing themselves. He goes, yeah, but he had a knife. I go, I get that. But what was the rush? And his response was, we had to do something, okay? I'm here to tell you, I haven't found any legal case where it says that you're required as law enforcement to stop someone from killing themselves. Now, I know the first reaction is like, what are you talking about? We have to. We can't do it. And what I found is people infuse religious beliefs, moral beliefs, with duty and legal standard. And that's where the conflict arises. And I'll go over some examples that come across. What I found is the courts often say, and I agree with them, that the solution, whether it's lethal force, should not be worse than the problem. Lethal force, and it's agreed upon that lethal force on someone who is only a threat to himself will be deemed excessive force. That's adopted. It's common law. There's a mistaken belief that we are obligated to stop or prevent the act by law. Not so in California. Again, check with your own states. I haven't found any that you have a legal duty as a law enforcement officer, particularly when they're on home. When they're on home, they still enjoy the Fourth Amendment protection, search and seizure. Now we have the exigent circumstances, right? However, when most of these are third-party calls, right? Johnny's having a bad day, broke with his girlfriend, got fired. Can you check on him? Please go, right? Well, he already made a threat that he's going to kill himself. We cannot leave. I'm here to tell you, you can. One of the things to remember is there's no duty, but do not establish special relationship. Special relationship is created when you tell the family, we're not going to hurt this person, we're here to help, we'll make it better, we'll take them into custody. More often than not, when you talk to the family members, and this is what we've been doing, and it's amazing the reaction you'll get. Well, what do you want the police to do? Well, I want you to help. Okay. So your loved one is in there, in his house, with a legally registered firearm, and I'm not going to talk about Second Amendment, anything like that, but the number of guns in this country, combined with mental illness, it's a recipe for disaster, and the police have to pick up the pieces. So, well, he doesn't want to come out. Well, but I want you to help. Okay, so you understand that if we force the issue and he presents that firearm, we're going to shoot him. We could possibly shoot. Well, I don't want that. So how do you recommend that we help your loved one? Well, he's not dangerous. He's not. No, we don't know this individual. And oftentimes we have suicide by cop, where the person has expressed the threat, hasn't carried it out, police get on scene, emotions get hijacked. He quickly goes from this, right? He can't pull the trigger, or she, and I'll talk about a Southern California case, to this. Now, how quickly does that happen, right? That'll be justified, right? But there's a recent case in Southern California that changed the steps that lead up to it on how we evaluate that. And it's very important. Adams versus Fremont, another one, welfare check. Guy was having a bad day. He'd been drinking. The family called. Officers responded. The family member heard a gunshot in the house. Now, it's interesting because the sergeant on scene formed a tactical team together and decided to make entry with a canine. So Mr. Adams gets upset. He runs. They find him in the backyard. He's in the backyard. They're talking to him. And within 15 minutes, he fires around. They return fire. He's dead. What they didn't know at the time, because he was in a bush, he had self-inflicted. So the family sued the very people who called 911 for help. The court said that, and it was the sergeant's response and their testimony that really raised an eyebrow, that it was an assaultive response rather than to assist. Court went also to say, unforeseeably, it is foreseeable that when PD respond to a person threatening suicide with a loaded firearm, that person may ultimately commit suicide. There is no duty to prevent further self-harm, no legal duty if PD's conduct fails to prevent threatened suicide from being carried out. Again, do not confuse moral or religious duty with legal authority, and that happens a lot, where officers, well-intended again, they want to do the right thing, they want to help, they get hijacked, and then it ends tragically. We're all familiar with Graham versus Connor, right? Well-established, 1989 landmark case. Courts and juries will consider the following factors to determine whether an officer's use of force was reasonable. Severity of the crime, again, crime. Whether the suspect poses an immediate threat to the safety of the officers or others, it's the most important factor. Whether the suspect is actively resisting arrest or attempting to evade arrest by flight. The level of type of force used. The availability of less severe alternatives, and the suspect's mental and emotional state. It also goes on to say, nor will an officer's good intentions make an objectively unreasonable use of force constitutional. So again, person's telling you, hey, just leave me alone, having a bad day. If you come in, it's going to end tragically. And because we're already tacked up, ready to go, we want to use our $1 million equipment, force the issue, we have a suicide by cop. Diorly versus Rutherford. Now, this was not a lethal incident. However, it was less lethal equipment. They shot him with a beanbag, and he lost an eye. So again, he had been diagnosed with hepatitis. He had been drinking. Family called due to his erratic behavior and suicidal threats. Officer responded. At one point, he had a hatchet, some other weapons, not a firearm, a bow without an arrow. He was just distraught. He kept saying, hey, kill me, shoot me, things like that. Really having a bad day. So the officer surrounded the house. He came out, and the officer who had the less lethal, he had an imaginary line of demarcation that if Mr. Diorly crossed, he would hit him with the less lethal. As it turned out, he kept advancing on him. He fired, hit him in the face. Mr. Diorly lost an eye, had some pellets in his skull. Family sued. Now, the courts went on to say on this one, the family was initially awarded, but the courts went on to say, wait a minute here. It's important to remember the problems posed by, and thus the tactics to be employed against, an emotionally distraught individual who is creating a disturbance or resisting arrest are and must be differentiated from those involved in efforts to subdue an armed and dangerous criminal who has recently committed a serious offense. Even when an emotionally disturbed individual is acting out, inviting officers to use deadly force to subdue him, the governmental interest in using such force is diminished by the fact that officers are confronted not with a criminal, but with a mentally ill person. Again, I'm not trying to say approach these things with cavalier attitude. They can still be dangerous. Officer safety is paramount. However, going back to that fundamental question, what do you have? Why are we here? Most of these, a lot of these are third-party checks. You know what? I got a text, social media, I'm concerned, called about their loved one. Guns involved, like the doctor said. How are we trained to respond, man, with a gun call, right? Backup, airship, assistance, siege the house, see what we got. This one really impacted our department. Hayes versus San Diego. Again, suicidal. This individual had attempted suicide before by inhaling exhaust fumes. Didn't work. He was depressed, so he told his girlfriend, you know what, I'm going to end it. She called the police. Actually, in this case, it was San Diego County Sheriff's officers. They responded. They decided to make entry, check on his welfare. Didn't ask some fundamental questions, which the court found were unreasonable later on. They found him in the kitchen, right? He's behind a counter. What do we tell people? Let me see your hands. What do we have in kitchens? Knives. What's in his hand? Knife. They ended up shooting him. So the girlfriend and the daughter sued. The courts examined this case, and they had some difficulty with it because they said, wait a minute, it was the pre-forced conduct or the actions that initiated. Yeah, he was armed. However, what led up to it, they were not happy with. They went on to say law enforcement officials should be aware of this additional level of scrutiny, particularly regarding a call involving an emotionally disturbed or suicidal person. In those cases, officers will now be expected, as time and circumstances permit, to conduct a thorough investigation about the subject before approaching him or her. Among other things, officers should obtain as much information as practical from family members, neighbors, witnesses, and review as many relevant records about the subject, including previous suicidal tendencies, whether weapons were involved, their current access to weapons, and whether the subject used alcohol or drugs prior to the response. They went on to say, the mere fact that a suspect possessed a weapon does not justify deadly force. Hayes' unexpected possession of the knife alone, particularly when he had committed no crime and was confronted in his own home, was not sufficient reason for the officers to employ deadly force. Our police commission adopted that mindset, and now when we're involved in the use of force, our tactics leading up to it are evaluated and assessed by the department. Again, wasn't easy, but I think in the end, it's important what led up to that. So why is strategic disengagement? And I'd like to take credit for it, but that's not my term. There's nothing tactical. Some people say tactical. This is a DOJ recommendation. They identified as a best practice that sometimes when tensions are high, when we have an enormous amount of resources, really don't have anything, yeah, it's okay to disengage. Disengage from the situation. When I first did it, we had an incident. It was an individual on he had a knife, and he had told his father, his girlfriend broke up with him, young male, 18 years old, no history of mental illness, just, you know what, goodbye cruel world, she broke my heart. So we got on scene, and again, the father's like, don't hurt him, I just want you to help him. He says, well, he just wants help. Okay, you know what, I promise you, we'll leave him alone. We'll visit him tomorrow when he's having a better day. So I told the guys, let's pack it up, we're done. And you would have sworn, they looked at me like I had two heads. What are you doing? We can't do this. No, we can do it, and we are doing it. His best interest. So when we left, the father actually actually tracked me down 2 days later, said, hey, I want to thank you for not hurting my son. We were able to follow up in the morning and get him treatment. Now, when I say disengagement, it's not just, okay, guys, we're done, pack it up, we're out of here. No, there's a systematic approach to it, and I'll explain one example why it was important. We have a great relationship with our mental evaluation unit, and we have the OIC right here, where they have a program where they can follow up and add resources. Departmental health, we have a good relationship. We give the family resources, we tell him why we're disengaging, and it's part of the education process. And more often than not, we say, well, he has a weapon or she has a weapon. If we make entry and he presents that weapon, we might have to hurt your loved one. Oh no, don't do that. Again, I'm calling to check. Well, he's fine. Right now he's fine. Now, I know I'm going to get the what ifs. I've been dealing with this for several years now. Well, what if he kills himself tomorrow or later on or when you live? Yes, that's a possibility. But what is the alternative? Force the issue, and now we've now bought that, we're holding it. So that's where it's important to educate the officers, educate your personnel on, yeah, this is why. Include the family, include other resources, because this truly is not a police matter. Someone having a bad day is not a police matter. What is a common theme right now with a lot of SWAT teams and a lot of law enforcement in general, right? Over-militarization, the heavy weaponry, the ballistic, looks like we're going to war. A lot of communities are having an issue with that. And unfortunately, because everything's on video now, everything is filmed, people are weighing in. People are the experts, and they're saying, well, why did they do that? They shouldn't have done it. That Hollywood Dilemma, you know, that slide, that show drives me nuts. Has anyone seen that show, SWAT on CBS? Come on, be honest. I know you guys are recording it right now. I have some shirts for it, by the way, if you want. So, but actually, that show, believe it or not, there's a piece of equipment called the Rook. It's like a little tactical vehicle. We've been trying to get it for like 5 years now, but due to funding, we can't. That show, they already got it. So they have a bigger budget than us. So it just shows you. And so, well, why don't you use that? We all drive around with our gloves on and tight shorts, or tight shirts, tight shorts and shirts. So. But unfortunately, who sits on these juries? Who sits on these juries? These very people that watch those shows and think, hey, that's reality. Well, why didn't you do this? They have this one thing. Not that I watch it, but one of my detectives is a writer on that show. And when he tells me there's a new episode, I text him, I just bust his chops because like, dude, really? And he said, hey, I tell the writers that's not real, but they don't want to hear it. You know, the guy, one of the producers or directors or something is from Fast and Furious, so you can see it's already Hollywood. But unfortunately, people believe that's real, including family members. All right, I'm going to show a video. This happened in Texas. This is out in open source. I'm not here to judge the tactics. I'm not here to criticize the department, the officers, but I just want to demonstrate how volatile these calls are and how quickly you can go from 0 to 100.
Well, tonight, another body cam video is putting a spotlight on deadly police force and sparking anger. The family of Jason Harrison, a mentally ill man shot dead by 2 Dallas officers, say they want the video to spark reforms in how police interact with the mentally ill. The day that Jason Harrison died, his mother had called police for help getting him to the hospital. Now, we want to warn you, the video is very graphic and obviously disturbing to watch. We'll let you decide what to make of it. Randy Kay has more.
2 Dallas police officers arriving for what they expect will be a routine disturbance call. Other officers had been to this home dozens of times before. This time would be different, and it's all about to be captured on the officer's body camera.
Police. Hello. What's going on? How you doing, man? What's going on?
Shirley Harrison answers the door. She'd called police about her son Jason. He's bipolar schizophrenic and off his medication. She's trying to get him to the hospital.
Oh, this is off the chain. Incoherent.
Who's that?
Chopping up people in the sun. Bipolar schizo.
What's going on?
As Shirley walks out, police notice a screwdriver in her son Jason's hand. What happens next is hard to watch.
You drop that for me. Drop that for me, guy.
Jay!
Drop it.
Jay!
Drop it.
Jay! That's your...
Within 10 seconds of the front door being opened, Jason Harrison lay dying in his own driveway, shot at least 5 times, twice in the back, by Officer John Rogers and Andrew Hutchins, who was wearing the body camera. His family says Jason hadn't committed any crime, nor did he likely understand why officers were even there.
What do you think police that day could have done differently?
They should not have been yelling orders off the top, because you've got someone that's mental, they're already confused. Now you stick a gun in their face and you yell at them.
When Shirley Harrison had called 911 for help, she told them her son was mentally ill and needed to get to a hospital.
They didn't take him to Parkland. They took him to the morgue.
So why did the officers open fire? Dallas police wouldn't talk to us, but the attorney for the officers did.
Was there any other option other than deadly force in this case?
No, there's not, because this is a deadly force encounter, and when you respond to lethal force, you respond to that with lethal force. A taser is a less lethal item.
Soon after the shooting, the officers signed affidavits about what happened. Both say Jason Harrison lunged at them, but here's the thing. Officer Hutchins says he lunged at Officer Rogers first and raised the screwdriver in the air. Officer Rogers says he lunged at Officer Hutchins first. Both officers agreed, though, that the screwdriver could have been used as a deadly puncture weapon.
With Jason bleeding out in the driveway, backup arrives. Listen as Officer Hutchins tries to explain to the others why they fired.
He was in the doorway. He had a screwdriver. We had this behind us. We had to shoot. He came at us.
But did he? Watch again.
Drop that for me. Drop that for me, guy.
Jay!
Drop it.
Jay!
Drop it.
Jay!
The Harrison's family attorney says if Jason had really lunged at the officer, you would have seen his whole body fill the screen of the body camera.
No, he didn't lunge, he didn't stab, he didn't jab. There was no thrust, there was no Zorro move.
All right, so again, not judging the tactics, the case, just again, how quickly these things deteriorate. And now you're in front of the camera giving a press briefing, and again, no crime was involved. Okay, mentally ill, refusing to take his meds. Because how we run things in Los Angeles, the incident commander on the field will call. There's 2 lieutenants on the team. We take turns and we'll screen the call. And more often than that, okay, what do you have? Well, he's refusing to take his meds. Okay, again, not criminal act. He doesn't have to, or she in his own home. What do you have? And I can hear the urgency in that incident commander's voice because emotions are hijacked. They have to do something. So just take a deep breath. We don't have a crime. And we start peeling back the layers. And really, when you look at it, we shouldn't even be there in the first place. All right, so disengagement considerations. Again, it's not a walk away. It's not complete. We're done. We're out of here. But you have to evaluate what's in the best interest of the subject. even though he or she may be suicidal. Might be just giving them some space. First responders, what's in the best interest of first responders? Are we going to put them in a position where they have to use deadly force on someone who's having a bad day? And most importantly, the subject's family and the community. Again, community expectations. Why did they have to kill that person? Right now in Southern California, there's a small agency that's grappling with an incident. Former actress on ER, 5 feet, dripping wet, maybe like 90 pounds. History of depression. Family or a friend out of state calls, hey, can you check on her? I'm concerned. Initially, they sent the fire department because they thought she was having a seizure. Turns out she was fine. Fire department's like, well, it's not our mess. Let's get the police involved. So they call the police, which they're great at doing. And their mental health unit responds. And they, hey, you know what, you need help. We want to get you some help. And she says, I don't want to go. I don't want to go back. I'm in my own house. I'm not going. So they push the issue. 90 minutes later, she's dead with 2 .556 rounds to her chest. Now, she had a replica BB gun. They didn't know that. She came out, brandished it. But looking at the press conference, and in that agency, the sheriffs investigate their homicides. You could hear the lieutenant giving the briefing. Well, she was having a seizure, and she was having issues, and one of the reporter picks up. So that now she's dead. I mean, you could see him grasping with it, trying to articulate without giving all the details of the investigation. So again, these are real challenges that we face. So we've drafted a policy because one of the things that we started doing, it's always better to have it in writing. So that way when people want to argue with you, we cannot do that. No, here it is. Chief Villegas will talk about the struggles on some of the hardliners that still can't wrap their head around it. But in our draft is decision to leave, delay contact, delay custody, or plan to make contact at different time and under different circumstances. What I've seen, it's a pressure relief valve. People are so wrapped up, they got to do something. You got the helicopter, you got family, everything. Okay, hold on here. And it's all of a sudden like just releasing air from a balloon. Just release that pressure that you have to do something. When in reality, more often than not, you don't. Fortunately in LA, and sometimes unfortunately, we're resource rich. I think sometimes when there's too many resources, it actually exacerbates the problem. I'm going to show a video here. Again, not to judge this agency. How I became aware of it was the plaintiff's attorney were looking for an expert on tactical situations, so they reached out and said, hey, would you mind being an expert on this matter? And I said, well, I really don't like doing it, but send me everything you have. And within 5 minutes, I'm like, oh, I'm not touching this with a 10-foot pole. They actually filed on the officers. Oops. Oh, here. Yeah. Yeah.
I have the right to kill you right now because you're trying to take me over. Don't get stupid with me.
We're not going to get stupid.
You said we were walking out of here, and you're bringing up assault, and everybody's going to get hurt again? All right, don't change up your agreement. I'm going to try to walk with you.
All right.
Love folks, try to harm me. Keep your word. I can keep you safe. All right? Don't worry about safety. I'm not a fucking murderer. All right? Try to harm me. Try to harm you. All right?
Do it.
Do it! Get on the ground!
Get on the ground! Get on the ground now! Get on the ground! Get on the ground!
Don't make fun of people.
Get on. Move it. Move it up!
Get your hands up!
Still got the knives in his hand? Still got the knives in his hand.
Still got his knives in his hand. Step it up behind you. You moving? Please don't hurt me.
His hands, he's still armed.
Yep.
Get your hands out.
Get
Drop
your hands
the knife.
up. Bring back. Right behind you.
Put your hands out to your side and drop the knife. Hands out to your side. Beanbag, beanbag. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife.
Still got the knife in it?
Negative effect.
Good luck hard on him? I can get him on him. Yeah, I don't want that knife in his head. Alright, he's good. Somebody step on that right hand real hard. He's got a knife in each hand, knife in each hand. Knife in each hand? Right, close. I can get around. I got left. Good. I'm gonna switch you. Alright. Good? You got lethal right there? Yes. I have lethal.
All right, pretty graphic. That wheezing that you heard, that was Mr. Boyd dying. They did transport him, but before he passed away, the surgeons amputated his arm, removed the lungs, spleen, and his colon. Unfortunately, he passed away. A lot of protests downtown. Anyone seen this video before? Would you be surprised to if I told you that the underlying offense that started this whole thing was illegal camping? So a neighbor had called, hey, there's a homeless guy living in the mountain behind my house. They respond. Behind these officers was another 30 officers, okay, with all their equipment. So again, what do you really have? And he's actually saying, hey, I'm not a murderer, I'm leaving. And then for some reason decided to throw a bang, and then it goes from there. And you see how quickly and how volatile these situations are. Okay, disengagement considerations. You have to ask yourself, is continued contact may increase safety risk to the individual, your officers, the community? No crime or minor crime? Suspect or subject? Remember, in California, mental illness is not a crime. Expressing suicidal thoughts is not a crime. There's no imminent danger to others in the community. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, what if he goes postal? What if he goes to the neighborhood and kills? Because I've been hearing that. Again, what if? More often than not, we'll be fine. However, do your due diligence. If neighbors said, yeah, he's made threats before, things like that, okay, now we can creep into the criminal area. Again, officers wanting to help. You got this individual here. You got the air traffic controller giving hand signals. You got another officer giving signals. You got the sergeant up there. So who's really in control? Now you think, oh, it's only one story. 5-foot fall landing on your head is enough to kill you. Officers aren't harnessed in. So again, well-intended officers, they want to do the right thing. Sometimes we forget to think. Here's another example. Again, what's the buzzword across the nation? And the reason why I'm showing you different examples is this is not just the left coast. This is not just California, Los Angeles. This is throughout the nation where departments are being criticized for the response to these volatile situations.
New and troubling video, a deadly encounter with police, this time in Delaware. 4 officers rushing to the scene. 2 of them you can see here, their weapons drawn, pointing at a young man in a wheelchair. Moments later, a hail of gunfire, and here's ABC's Lindsay Davis.
New accusations tonight of police using excessive deadly force caught on cell phone video.
Give me your hands, give me your hands!
Police make this demand more than a dozen times.
Show me your hands!
4 Wilmington, Delaware officers with guns drawn Wednesday afternoon responding to a call of a man with a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
Drop the gun!
28-year-old Jeremy McDowell was previously paralyzed from the waist down from a gunshot 10 years ago. On Wednesday, police say they thought he was reaching for a gun. Moments later, a barrage of bullets, killing him. McDowell's mother disputes police, who say a gun was recovered near her son's body.
This is unjust. He had his hands on his lap when they opened and fired on him 5 more times.
The 4 officers involved have all been put on paid administrative leave pending an investigation. In the last 5 months, there's been a sharp uptick in officer indictments. At least 14 police officers have been charged with committing murder, homicide, or manslaughter while on duty. Some say it's because so many of these incidents are videotaped.
Okay, so that's another factor. What just happened in Chicago recently? It hasn't happened in 50 years, right? Officer was convicted. I mean, I love this profession. Got 30 years in this profession, but it's under attack. When you have people cheering the street because an officer's convicted, I mean, that's heartbreaking for me. But But unfortunately, a lot of these videos are causing these changes, these outbursts. But it's the community expectations, like that's not how we want our police officers to respond. All right, so what's strategic in disengagement? So it's important to assess risk to all parties, particularly if they're own home. Now, I've showed you some open area incidents and in their home. If they're in their home, that's even a higher threshold. Open area, different approach, assess risk to all parties, right? If this individual is waving the gun at people, different story. Identifying most appropriate proportional response to what you actually have. Delay or terminate contact, delay custody, and just leave. It's okay. We had an incident on a bridge just recently. Fire department, I love the fire department, but they wanted to use their airbags. I think they just got them for Christmas or something, and airbags, hook and ladder. I mean, it was a circus. And after 3 hours of hearing the guy on the bridge, and it was over a river, you know, F you guys, blah, 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 not want anything. I said, we're done, we're leaving. That battalion chief's head looked like it was gonna explode. He says, where are you going? I said, we're leaving, we're done. If you wanna stay, we gave the guy a warning, hey, it's dangerous where you're at, you don't want our help, have a nice day. That battalion chief's head was about to explode. I mean, once he wrapped his head around it, he's like, oh, we could do this? Yes, it's fine. And within 10 minutes of breaking everything down, the guy took off running. So officers got him later on. So again, not getting emotionally hijacked. So if there is a risk, you assess and you go back to the beginning. Now, put your money where your mouth is, right? That's what I always say. Here's some examples where we've done it in Los Angeles. And I cannot make these endings up. I promise you, this is actually what happened. So city of LA is over 400 square miles, 4 million people. Different parts of the city, we have most affluent to impoverished. September 22nd, 2016, suicidal threat call. This was from the girlfriend. She had broken up with her ex-boyfriend. He sends her a text, goodbye cruel world, it's your fault. What does she do? Calls the police. We've since modified our response to suicidal calls. We don't send a whole SWAT package. We just send the negotiators, myself. And then if there's a crime or there's shots fired, then we grow from there, okay? Because again, what do we actually have? After several hours, he's like, hey, if you come in, we're gonna shoot it out. So he's just telling us what's gonna happen. We talked to neighbors. No, he's very nice. He's a very nice guy. You know, I know he's heartbroken because his girlfriend, da-da-da-da-da-da. I says, we're packing it up. He legally owned that gun. We had no reason to take his gun. Now in California, they did change the law where we can obtain a restraining order on someone who's expressed suicidal ideations. This is a result of the Isla Vista shooting where this individual killed some fellow students. Very tragic incident. However, you still have to serve that person. And again, it's a misdemeanor, so how much force are you going to use to enforce that? So a decision was made, let's leave. We talked to the family, they're like, oh no, we don't want you to hurt him, he's a nice guy, da-da-da. It says, we will ensure we stay in communication with him. If things change, great. A couple days later, another call came out. Officers ended up getting him while he was walking his dog. October 3rd, 2016, Hollenbeck area, suicidal threat call. Again, called his girlfriend. This one he posted on social media. She called the police. He was a detached garage in the main house, and the airship overhead said, I see him in the garage. So if you see suicidal man with a gun call, what do you think the anxiety level of the officer is going to be? It's already 100 miles an hour. So I was monitoring the radio. And the airship's like, got him in the garage, da-da-da. Next thing you know, I hear officers, we got family members in the main house, we're gonna effect a rescue. I mean, it was just complete pandemonium. I got on the air and says, what crime do we have? And you could hear a pause, like, what crime do we have? And you could hear him grasping. So the incident commander gets on and says, we don't have a crime. Okay, just contain it. I'll send some CNT package and we'll get there. So we got there, negotiated for several hours. He's like, nah, you know what? I'm not coming out, blah, blah, blah. We talked to the family. We don't want you to hurt our loved one. We will ensure that he gets help. We gave him some resources. So we told the guy, hey, we're done. You don't want our help. We're going to leave. Now, again, strategic. So we systematically broke it down beginning from the end. Tell all the parties involved, hey, we're gonna disengage. Containment on the front will be last. If all of a sudden something happens spontaneous, just hold your position, stay behind cover. So we told the guy, we're leaving. He goes, where are you going? Even the subject was, where are you going? We're leaving. Have a nice day. Within seconds, the garage door opened, and he's doing this. Okay, volatile situation, right? Easily go from this to this. Told officer of containment, hold your position, stay behind cover. We have no crime. Obviously, if he presents a threat and is a threat to you, then, respond accordingly. So luckily, because we did it systematically, he's like this for a few minutes, and he's asking for the negotiator. Where's James? Where's James? He's out here. You got to throw the gun. You could talk to him. Within minutes, he threw the gun down. I mean, I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't see it. But it's, again, you cannot predict human behavior. Last one was a mental illness call, 77th. Family calls. He's on the roof, like 1 in the morning, and he's barking at the moon, right? Just like the song. So he's barking at the moon. We get there. It's a high-pitched roof in those old Victorian homes, and there's no way we can get there. So again, fire department's there with a hook and ladder. They're ready to do the rescue. Hold on, it's a police incident. Stand by, thank you. And we tried to talk to him. He's not responding. So the family says, oh, also, by the way, he uses drugs. He has a heavy drug problem. So now we got the combination, right? And more often than not, this is a combination of drugs and mental illness, recipe for disaster. So we tell the family, what do you want us to do? Well, I want you to help him. Okay, well, we're not going to go up there and wrestle with him and grapple with him on the roof. He's going to get hurt. Well, I don't want that. All right, so we're going to leave, and if things change, you can call us back. Okay. We left. A few hours later, or within 15 minutes, he climbed through an attic opening. Then later on that day, he came out again, slipped, fell, broke his arm. But again, was it the police's fault? No. They put him on a hold, easy day. All right, so some of the challenges, I'm going to introduce Chief Villegas, because this has been a challenge in introducing. Chief Villegas.
Good morning, everyone. As you can imagine, change is difficult in any organization, and specifically it's been difficult in our organization. We're like the Titanic. We turn very slowly. It takes a long, long time. And if bureaucracy is in a system, it's triplicated in ours. So we've been working on this policy for a little bit over 2 years, and we've written it, rewritten it, and gotten very, very close. We have a draft policy in place. We're actually implementing it slowly. SWAT's primarily the one that's driving it in terms of their implementation. But it's been very difficult, and it's been difficult because I think what they talked about is some of our police culture. It's also difficult because people have their own expectations as it relates to when we're going to stop and start an incident. But quite frankly, it's very, very difficult for any of us to do it. But until one of us in the United States puts policy together, then the next policy, we can slowly refine these. Ours is very close to being implemented, and we'll be sending it around to other organizations. The challenge for us, though, is normally policies are written by executives, right, or the staffers of the executives who are in an ivory tower and come up with these whiz-bang ideas and then put pen to paper and trying to force the issue. In this case, this policy wasn't written from the top down. It was actually written from the bottom up. One of our SWAT commanders started doing some research and started saying, hey, if the case law allows us to, we have the legal support to make sure that we can disengage. We have the community expectation for us to disengage. And when we looked at the legal issues, we have liabilities. We're putting out tons and tons of dollars out there because of some of the actions. Then you have Hayes with pre-forced conduct that's specifically identifying that we need to do things before we actually apply lethal force. So when you have the combination of all these things, there's a need for that policy to be implemented. For us, in that process, we took it to what we call the TTRC, the Tactical Training Review Committee. The Tactical Training Review Committee for us is a committee that has members of specialized units, patrol officers, has a member of our union, our league that's in there, has representatives from the command staff as well as the rank and file. And it's supposed to come up with a policy that would be implemented without resistance. So when this process took place, there was a struggle within the committee itself to come up with the language that would allow us to leave an incident. And of course, all the what if scenarios and how do we just leave an incident? So when that came up through the rank and file, it came up through the TTRC and eventually landed before the executives of LAPD. For whatever reason, it got stuck, and it's been stuck there for a little while. So we're working through that process. I'm going to try and get it out. But essentially, the difficulty for us in terms of addressing it is addressing our own individual beliefs, with respect to that. I think that Ruben Lopez covered the issues with respect to moral, religious, and all those things. And we tend to hold on to tradition and wanting to implement that, wanting to resist that type of a change. But that's in the process of addressing it. We're also coming up with what we're calling best practices and identifying specific scenarios, some of the ones he recently talked about. And there's been a couple of others. We've had some captains that were incident commanders at some critical incidents that also, packed up their bags and left a crime-related incident that was low-level, misdemeanor, no violence, and then came back the next day to address that particular crime when it wasn't as volatile. And because of those types of successes, once we identify those successes and put pen to paper to them so that we can share them with our folks, I think it'll be a much more palatable. So that we're trying to sandwich the approach from bottom up and from top down so that there is a way that it's accepted within the organization. But it's certainly not easy. It's very, very challenging for us to do that, and I suspect it is in other organizations, given all the conversations we had. Yesterday or 2 days ago, we had another presentation in another room here at IACP regarding de-escalation, and the need to de-escalate incidents, the need to diffuse or to reduce the intensity of an incident so that we can prevent and try our best not to use force. And that concept of de-escalation, it really fits into the disengagement piece, but all of those efforts to disengage, or to de-escalate rather, kind of culminates at a point where you have to make a decision. And that decision is, are you going to enter or engage, or are you going to disengage and leave? And that critical decision point, our officers, our incident commanders need to have enough information so that they can make the right decision, whether it's regarding law, their expectation of the community at that time for that reason. So that fact pattern has to be solid before we make a decision to move forward or not. What I like to do, though, is kind of open it up to questions. I know that sometimes when we rush through this, because this is like a 3-day class, really, if you go from the legal aspects through the actual aspects of policy implementation. But if we can open it up to questions.
Yeah, just a reminder to go to the mic if you can. We have plenty of time, so do think about some questions.
Thank you, Chief. And I did hear your last lecture. It is a process. I'm more interested in the Ninth Circuit, and they're trying to take out, in Graham versus Connor, they're trying to take out the word reasonable and put in necessary. How is that affecting your department? Because, and I'll give you for instance, because I do expert witness work testimony on this, and I have a police department that wrote in their use of force, reasonably necessary. And I try to tell them, that's a bad move to put in that word necessary, because ultimately they'll break it down to reasonable and necessary, and then they'll just get rid of reasonable altogether, and that will hurt us tremendously as far as how we do the use of force. So, Ninth Circuit, how are they dealing with that? Because I heard California wants to change the law from reasonable to necessary.
Well, I think you're talking about two different things. The first is the legislature, the senators, et cetera, the assemblymen, assembly speakers that are trying to add California law, they want to add reasonable and or necessary into that. I think it was defeated most recently, but it's gonna come up again. And so it is an issue. But when you look at case law throughout, not just the Ninth Circuit, one of the words that's often cited within the rationale from the judges is necessary. Was it necessary to use force? Although they're not challenging Graham versus Connor, because when you look at Graham versus Connor, it's one of the reasons it stood the test of time is because it's fact specific. It goes to the specifics of individual actions that are occurring at that time, and then you're looking at those actions from the lens of a reasonable officer with same training and experience. So when you look at those fact patterns in these cases, you can ask the question, was it necessary? Was it proportionate? Was it reasonable given the totality of the circumstances? And that's what you're finding in the rationales of a lot of use of force cases, whether it's the taser, whether it's less lethal, whether it's other types of munitions, and certainly as we go to lethal force, it's coming up consistently as a term that's asking a question before they determine if it was reasonable.
Gentlemen, thank you for being here today. You've provided some good cases and examples where walking away worked out with a good outcome and you're able to go back and handle the situation later, or there just wasn't a crime and so there was no need for you to be there. I'm curious, in your research, have you encountered any situations, or in your own experience, have you encountered any situations where you did leave or walk away and then the subject under investigation or the reason for the call ended up hurting themselves, somebody in their family, or somebody in the neighborhood or somewhere else, and then you found yourself either being under litigation or under complaint or under scrutiny for walking away?
Good question. That comes up all the time. So I haven't found one case where a department was held liable, and again, foreseeable actions. There has been cases where a family member has been harmed, but they did not disengage. That was a broken mental health system, so they are treated, they're released, then they come back home and then they use violence. I haven't found any. Again, this is new in LA. We've been doing it. I know Vancouver, Washington, and Portland have adopted a policy because they had a lot of tragic incidents. But I haven't found one where, again, you're going to be held for predicting the future. And again, that's why it's important to engage the family. Lock them in. What do you want the police to do? Well, I don't want you to hurt them. And so you got to have that dialogue with the family. You know, they have someplace else to stay. Can they follow up? Do they have access to departmental health? Things like that.
Thank you. Did I understand you to say that you're familiar with one case? Where
No.
You're not? Okay.
No. I'll just add that the one case that I'm aware of, the caveat is that there was a special relationship established by the agency. It's the case of Doe versus the city of Modesto. And if you've heard about that one, it was a 4-year-old girl out wandering the street, and officers were called, officers responded, took custody of the child, DCFS custody or child services custody, and then the mother, who's suffering from mental illness, was in the house. I won't get into all the details, but basically, in relation to the daughter being taken into custody, duty was established to the mother as her guardian, and the special relationship occurred when officers told family members of the mother, we have this handled, the police are going to take care of her. When they asked, should we go check on her, should we make sure she's okay? Somehow a fire was started in the home and she died in that fire. And again, it comes back to that special relationship was established. If that special relationship was not established, by all accounts, law enforcement would not be liable in any way.
Gentlemen, again, thank you. I think the conversation, the topic is timely.
Thank you very much.
Part of the problem with the special relationship issue is that generally when our officers respond to something and they make contact with the reporting party or a person reporting the incident, we generally say, oh, thank you, we got it, everything's going to be okay. And that language that we use that's well intended is sometimes that link that now we have a situation where we have to act as close to in accordance to the community or to their wishes. And sometimes that relationship is now forces an issue for us. So as we craft this policy and we go into the next aspect of it, which is training, the implementation of it, we're going to have to be very careful at the very beginning before incident commanders arrive or other supervisors arrive, because it's the linkages in terms of the communication that our officers initially had at first contact with the first person, the victim, or the person reporting.
Gentlemen, thank you for coming. Questions about neighbor notifications. What's your practices on notifying neighbors when you do have to walk away from a situation like this?
So that's part of the process as well. Again, due diligence. We've talked to neighbors as far as any problems with the individual. Have they been violent in the past with any of the neighbors, things like that. More often than not, because it's a mental health issue, we do not advise anyone through Nixle or anything or reverse 911 of the specifics. Just basically there was an incident, it's been resolved. Anything unusual, report back or call the police. And we haven't had any issues that I can think of. But it's important to have that discussion with the family, because all of a sudden they see this buildup and then this breakdown, which is fine. I mean, most of these people just want their community back. We bring a large footprint to the party, and they just want to get their community back.
Thanks for coming. Very interesting. So my question is, the person who, leaving aside the tactics, the person who was in the wheelchair on a public street, and the other factor that I wonder if you run into is, what if you can't confirm that the suicidal person does have a license for the weapon, that the weapon isn't legally possessed? Does that then definitely cut for action, or do you still walk away maybe from somebody who's got an illegal weapon and is a suicidal threat?
So, good question. As I said earlier, public place, own home, complete different approach. Obviously, if they're in their own home, that's a higher threshold. Public place here, you're going to do your due diligence. You're going to contain the individual, trying to establish from behind cover, try to communicate. Usually, what we've seen, even though Los Angeles is a big city, it's made up of very small communities, and within minutes, family or friends will come on scene, and they know what's going on, and hey, I can talk to this individual. Some teams don't allow third parties to get involved. As you saw the video with the father, if they just let it, we've done that. We've started that several years ago, and even our doctors from prior training were like, well, why are we doing that? Well, it's going to help where that way down the road litigation, yeah, we let him hear his voice. We let him know that his father was here. Again, it's that police authority. We got it. We're in charge. We don't need your help. And sometimes on these types of incidents, you do. Like I said, just slowing it down, releasing that pressure, getting everyone in place as far as their emotions on what you really have. So that one, on the, let's say the Delaware, that'd probably be longer, because we'd have to find out exactly what's his mindset, all that, communicate, things like that. But approaching to leaving cover is going to minimize your time to react. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you for participating. Thank you for engaging in this. We're going to upload into the IACP the handouts. One of the handouts that we have is the draft policy, the draft procedures. They're currently in draft mode, so it's not official yet, but we should be able to get that out. If you email either one of us, once we've got the actual policy, we'll send it to you so that you can look at it and adopt it to your state, your region, your department. Thank you.
Thank you all.